In 1879, fire consumed the Red Dog Saloon. Only a ledger survived, 30 names crossed out. Beside it, a crystal glass half filled with ash. Who was erased from the page? A piano warped in heat, a feather on ivory keys, a mirror shattered in dust. From the 1820s to 1890s, saloons spread across mining camps and boomtowns. Whiskey, poker, crystal, and chandeliers. But many names vanished from their books. When glasses were raised, what else burned in silence? Welcome to history's ledger. The saloon of the frontier was never just a backdrop for whiskey and cards. It was chandelier prisms trembling over spit-soaked sawdust. It was velvet tables stained with Bordeaux, mirrors doubling smoke and perfume. Until the room looked endless, but it was also silence. Ledgers torn mid-column, pawn tickets folded and never redeemed. A glove left on a counter, initials stitched in thread no one remembered. This is not the saloon of Hollywood. This is the saloon of ash, of baccarat glasses filled with nothing but dust, of ostrich feathers curling black in fire. A world where luxury and ruin shared the same roof, and where memory lingers only in fragments. So let us turn the page together. Let us walk through doors long closed and listen for what the West tried but failed to erase. In 1879, fire came for the Red Dog Saloon. Oil lamps burst one by one, glass chiming like warning bells. Velvet curtains caught first, flames reaching into rafters. Chandeliers from Denver quivered, then crashed, prisms shattering across pine. Gilt-framed mirrors cracked, throwing faces into splinters before surrendering to heat. By dawn, it was ash and silence. And yet, some things remained. A ledger, leather-bound, edges gilt, names crossed in red, 30 of them erased without explanation. Beside it, a baccarat glass, half filled with ash. A red ostrich feather rested on warped piano keys. The mirror's frame endured, its gold leaf blackened, but glinting still. The Red Dog had been spectacle before it was ruin. Men called it a palace, though its floor was polished pine. Velvet poker tables, crystal decanters, champagne coupes delicate as fingers. Paintings of hunting dogs lined the walls. A brass clock chimed hourly, and the safe was lined in gold foil wallpaper, absurd against the scent of whiskey and smoke. Women wore silk shawls and feathered hats that brushed gas sconces. Perfume, rosewater, lavender, ambergris, layered into the room like breath. The piano, dragged at great cost, sounded dulled but gleamed still. Laughter climbed over the brittle notes, over the rustle of taffeta, over the chime of baccarat glasses against velvet. Men came with boots dusted red, lining poker tables with gold coins, ordering champagne though they ate only beans. A bartender, professor by name, poured with ritual, rye into crystal like sacrament. A mirror behind him doubled it all, chandeliers, feathers, smoke. Then fire took it. Some say a curtain brushed an oil lamp. Others, a shaking hand dropped a match. Whiskey carried flame like rumor. The ledger says nothing. It only records names. A rancher, a dancer, a gambler marked with a single initial. 30 red slashes. Were debts forgiven or accounts closed by death? Velvet burned, perfume shattered, crates of Bordeaux in the cellar blackened and burst. But the ledger remained. So did the glass, as if poured carefully and left behind. Boots sifted through ruin. A gold watch fused to the bar, its lid pried open. To may you never be late again. The ticket to redeem it never surfaced. Gilt mirror frames were pulled from cinders. Crystal decanters split, but some prisms still caught sun. A bottle of Bordeaux, label scorched, glass intact, uncorked and soured. Luxury had survived, but only as evidence. On the stoop, a red feather, powder and rose still clung to it. Bartenders remembered a woman who danced nightly, then vanished from the ledger. The feather remained. The red dog's mystery lay not in fire, but in what fire left untouched. A ledger that crosses out 30 names in red. A glass that held only ash. Objects endured, stories didn't. And in the silence after the flame, nothing was kind. In the 1820s, the saloon wasn't a palace. It was 4 posts in the dirt, a canvas overhead, sometimes a lean-to nailed to someone else's wall. The floor was dust. The roof sagged. A single iron stove smoked into the sky, the only warmth when prairie nights dropped below freezing. And still, refinement found its way in. A crystal decanter, absurd against a plank bar. A silver spoon resting in a miner's blackened hand. A velvet pouch laid beside a tin mug. Not necessity, intention. Fragile things, carried west like memories that refused to disappear. The whiskey was fire, turpentine, tobacco juice, ammonia, burnt sugar, coffin varnish. Men drank fast. Coughing became part of the ritual. They laughed through it, slammed their mugs, wiped tears with the backs of their hands. The act mattered more than the comfort. The ceremony was what made it saloon, not shack. Travelers wrote of the smells, unwashed coats, smoke, rot gut, a draft of gunpowder. Sounds, boots on dirt, cards on crates, the soft, metallic ring of a knife set down. And always, the strange glint of refinement, a polished brass candlestick, a mirror cracked but framed in gilt, a bottle wrapped in wallpaper torn from freight crates. Brown's Hole, 1822. On the edge of what would become Wyoming, Utah, Colorado. 25 cents a glass. Mud for floor, canvas for roof. And yet inside, engraved decanters, ivory pipes, pocket watches ticking beside tin mugs. The contradiction wasn't shameful. It was the point. No ledgers survived from those first saloons. Fires took them. Rain took them, or they were never kept. Debts paid in pelts, dust, or a nod. Absence became tradition. Silence wasn't just what happened between toasts. It was how memory was written. The West was open. It was not clean. And from the beginning, beneath canvas and stars, the saloon carried both elegance and erasure in its bones. By the 1850s, tents gave way to timber. Mining strikes pulled men by the thousands. Towns rose overnight. Dodge City, Deadwood, Tombstone. Streets rough with boards. Saloons lit by kerosene and spectacle. These rooms weren't yet the mirrored palaces to come, but already they glimmered. Velvet draped across poker tables. Crystal decanters lined plank bars. Gaslight flickered off glass until it shimmered like jewelry. Floors were mud-streaked, air thick with sweat and smoke. Yet overhead, chandeliers insisted this was not just the frontier. It was theater. Community gathered here. Ballots were cast into brass boxes. Judges read verdicts under ceiling beams still stained with whiskey. On Sundays, preachers used the same rooms. Their words echoed off the same gilt mirrors that had reflected cards and feathers the night before. The irony was sharp, but the room always served. Sound layered itself thick. A piano thumped in the corner, notes chipped but brave. Dice rolled across velvet like bones. Laughter rose, fell, fractured. Outside, cattle lowed. Inside, glasses chimed. Crystal, raised in toasts no one remembered by morning. Luxury arrived by freight. Crates of Bordeaux from rail cars. Chandeliers packed in hay and gold paper. One woman stepped through a doorway in satin, her ostrich feather bending beneath low beams. The air behind her changed, rosewater threading through tobacco and sweat. For a moment, the room forgot itself, but not every detail made it to record. A deadwood ledger ends mid-column, half a page struck in ink dark as dried blood. A sheriff's log notes a piano bought for $1,000. Months later, it's gone. Burned, abandoned, or stolen. No one says which. A pawn slip survives in Tombstone for a gold pocket watch. To R, the ticket was never redeemed. Smell told its own truth. Whiskey sharp as vinegar. Tobacco thick in wool. Spilled Bordeaux drying sticky on pine. Sawdust blackened by spit. Patrons reeked of it all and still wrapped bottles in satin before stepping into dust. Objects stayed long after their owners left. A silver card case in rubble, initials polished still. A lace glove curled in a cellar. Chandeliers shattered, but catching light in ash. A ledger missing its last page, blank where memory should be. The West was open. It was not clean. In these Boomtown Halls, glamour and silence were always in the same room. By the 1870s, the saloon had become a palace. Mirrors taller than men stood behind 30-foot bars, their glass framed in gilt leaf, polished until they doubled the room. Chandeliers of crystal prisms trembled above pine floors, still tracked with mud. Lamplight scattered across velvet poker tables, catching on gold cufflinks, etched glass, feathered hats. Outside, manure. Inside, Paris. The air carried contradiction. Cigars burned in brass trays. Perfume rose, rosewater, ambergris, powder. Behind the bar, bottles glinted, green, cobalt, clear. Gaslight shimmered in baccarat coupes, raised in slow, deliberate toasts. Champagne fizzed, cut glass catching every ripple. The piano clanged from the corner. Dice skipped like thunder. Cards snapped down like whispers. Laughter came in fits, sudden, brittle, short-lived. Then silence. Then smoke. Bartenders were called professors. Their movements were choreographed. Absinthe in emerald bottles, bitters in glass stoppered flasks. Spoons twisted like ribbon. Citrus peels flamed and curled. Drinks poured like rituals. A coupe lifted under lamplight looked like glass spun from breath. Luxury was detail. Mahogany bars inlaid with mother of pearl. Velvet with gilt thread. Champagne crates stamped with coats of arms. Unopened in cellars flooded with mud. Even gas lamps hissed with polish. But silence followed. In Deadwood, a ledger ends in red. Half the names struck through. In Tombstone, a pawn ticket. To R, may you never be late again. Still unclaimed. In Dodge City, a piano once worth 1,000 sat warped, keys curled upward like ribs. One woman danced nightly in a red ostrich feather hat. Bartenders recalled her perfume trailing across mirrors. Her laughter rose above piano chords. Then, nothing. No name. No grave. Only the scent, still clinging to velvet curtains. Luxury endured without witness. A silver cigarette case, initials too faint to trace. A lace glove pressed into a scorched mirror frame. A coupe buried in ash, stem intact. A chandelier prism that still scattered rainbows when lifted from ruin. The West remembered mirrors, not faces. Chandeliers over spit, crystal filled with ash. Bordeaux beside coffin varnish. Names lost in ledgers, reflections sharp in glass. By the 1890s, reform had a rhythm. It began with hymns outside the saloon doors. Women in heavy coats, white ribbons pinned to collars, gloves gripping hymnals. Their breath fogged the glass. One voice rose, then another. Inside, the professor paused mid-pour. Champagne fizzed faintly. Rosewater perfume still hung above spilled whiskey. He'd heard hymns before, but not like this. The door opened. Snow scattered across the pine. A woman stepped forward, polished hatchet in hand. The mirror cracked first. Silver splintered. Crystal trembled. A chandelier fell. Prisms shattering over velvet. Cut glass decanters rolled and burst. Bordeaux spreading dark and sweet across the mahogany. perfume bottles shattered in bursts of powder and sweetness. The noise came in layers, hymns outside, glass inside. A piano groaned in the corner, its keys chattering as the floor shifted. Gas lamps hissed. Women moved with purpose. Bottles tipped, menus torn in half. Champagne foamed across sawdust, sugar, vinegar, paper. Ordinances had already begun. In Kansas, licenses expired. In Ohio, taxes starved the bars. Reform pamphlets embossed with crests arrived by train, tied with ribbon. But here, reform carried iron. Objects fell in silence. A stained glass lamp burst in amber and garnet. A gold leaf frame cracked, flakes clinging to coats. A satin glove surfaced, browned by smoke, initials still stitched. A pawn ticket for a gold watch. To R. May you never be late again. No receipt, no name. The professor didn't speak. He set down the coupe and lifted a bottle of French vermouth. Its label still gleamed with scrollwork. He turned it in the light, thumb smudging the gilt. Then he placed it gently in the wreckage. Outside, the hymns swelled. Inside, the chandelier's last prism caught light, then fell. Brass struck marble. The hour was marked, soft and final. Snow drifted through the broken windows. On the bar, the mother of pearl inlay glimmered quietly. No voice recorded the moment. No name was written down. Only red slashes across ledges. Only a glove in ash. Only silence. The lamps were lit, but the tables were bare. A fine room wasted, and nothing left but the smell of wine gone sour. Letter from a traveler through Cheyenne, 1894. By the 1890s, the great saloons still stood, but they had gone quiet. Chandeliers glittered for fewer eyes. Mirrors reflected more absence than faces. The thunder of voices dimmed into coughs and dice that rolled alone. Furniture stayed loyal. Marble counters stayed cool. Chairs with brass studs lined up along walls of sagging damask. Ormolu clocks ticked steadily, chiming into silence. Behind the bar, baccarat glasses waited, never broken, never lifted. Luxury remained, unused. In Denver, champagne crates curled under damp cellar air. In Leadville, Bordeaux spoiled unopened when the saloon closed by ordinance. In Deadwood, brocade curtains still hung, while the bar poured only water. It was elegance in still life, unclaimed, untouched. But outside, sermons grew louder. Reformers printed pamphlets by the thousands, stamped with crests, tied in ribbon. Ordinances passed. Licenses expired. Ministers thundered, while pianists played to no one in rooms already half closed. Some owners resisted. The rooms became mausoleums. A coupe used once a week. A silver knife slicing lemons for seltzer. A mirror turned sideways, no longer showing the emptiness it reflected. The glamour soured. Champagne popped. and released only vinegar. Artifacts spoke clearly. A gold watch, ticket intact, never reclaimed. A deadwood ledger with 3 pages struck through, ink bleeding from water damage. In Dodge City, a warped piano still rang one brittle note, sharp, metallic, unresolved. The last patrons drank anyway, quiet toasts, no laughter, no clink of glass worth remembering, just the weight of memory. When the lamps dimmed, only the objects remained. A coupe on its side, a curtain heavy with dust, the faintest stain of spoiled wine rising from the floorboards, sweet, then wrong, then unforgettable. The scissors clicked once, then again. A lemon curled open, peel twisting like gold ribbon. Behind the bar, the professor's hands moved without pause. Knife, shaker, coupe. All placed with care on a mahogany counter, veined in mother of pearl. They called him a professor not for education, but for elegance. His bottles were his books. Curacao in cobalt, absinthe in emerald, French vermouth wrapped in gilt labels softening in damp air. Bitters came in small glass flasks with silver stoppers. Each cork released sharp layers, citrus, clove, bark. The movements mattered more than the recipe. A coupe of baccarat, stem thin, bowl etched with vines, trembled as it was lifted by the rim. A silver spoon stirred in silence. Lemon oil misted the surface. Patrons leaned closer, not for the drink, for the ritual. Letters from Deadwood called them alchemists in waistcoats. They turned bitterness into sugar with one twist, a traveler wrote in 1878. On the frontier, their craft was spectacle, evidence that the West could be refined, even if only for the space of a glass. The contradiction lingered in the air. Curaçao's sweetness mingled with stale beer. Lemon oil brightened smoke from cigars. Powdered rose drifted from a woman's sleeve, while sawdust blackened beneath her feet. Some objects outlasted everything. In Denver, a mahogany counter still stands, surface polished by coins and palms. In Cheyenne, a dented silver shaker engraved EV was found beneath ruins. In Leadville, a pawn ledger listed professor's formula, page torn. No recipe, no name, only silence. Their drinks survived. Their signatures did not. It began with the smell, not cigars or whiskey, but wine left too long in the dark, a sweetness that clung like perfume, then soured. It rose from the floorboards, mixing with dust and smoke. By the time a man noticed, it had already settled in his coat. The saloons were still dressed for an audience. Chandeliers hung. Damask wallpaper curled at the edges. Marble hearths glowed under gaslight. Baccarat coupes lined the shelves, their stems chilled, untouched. But the audience had thinned. Pianos stood silent. Keys yellowed. Dice rolled once, rarely again. Reflections in mirrors showed no one returning. Still, Luxury lingered, gilt thread in brocade, cut glass decanters in velvet-lined drawers, champagne sealed in green bottles, corks swollen in the dark. In cellars, Bordeaux soured, unopened. Some crates waited for a toast that never came. History bled on paper. A Denver ledger lists 60 crates of champagne received in 1891. 3 pages after, torn. In Deadwood, names ran clear until water blurred the final lines. A dozen entries struck out in red. No explanation, no reply. Mystery rested in glass. A coupe found under a stairwell, rim faintly stained. In Leadville, a bartender's recipe, the opera ends mid-sentence. Stir until the surface reflects, and nothing more. The rooms kept breathing. Curtains still held rose powder. Drawers hid folded gloves, initials stitched in silk. A porcelain dish painted with lilies sat uncracked on the mantel. No owner remembered, but the scent remained. Sound faded slowly. A cork popped, too loud in a quiet hall. A glass set on marble rang out like a chime. One piano key hummed when brushed, metallic and dry. Then silence. Ormolu clocks ticked. Chandeliers glittered for no one. Mirrors doubled a room already halved. And in the cellar, unopened bottles leaned in water, their labels curled, foil tarnished. Above them, shattered prisms lay in ash, scattering rainbows even now. The straw pricked, scratched through ticking, dry and alive. A man shifted, the sack crackled. Lice, bedbugs, fleas crawled inside seams. The blanket, stiff with smoke, sweat, pressed him into the straw like punishment. Rooms were never empty. Animals shared the heat. A cow's breath steamed in the dark. Chickens rustled beneath benches. Rats scurried across beams. The air soured, wool, manure, ash, layered into a single breath. And still, beauty insisted. A damask quilt spread across the straw. A pearl button fastened at a child's throat. An ivory comb lay polished on a table. A mirror, painted and cracked, hung crooked but whole. Even filth had a frame. Travelers noticed. A Kansas letter, 1872. We lie with beasts. The air is foul, and yet she brushed her hair 100 strokes before bed. No name recorded, only the strokes. The ritual mattered more than the woman. Mystery settled in small things. In Arizona, archaeologists found a scorched trunk beneath a saloon. Cloth with stitched initials, a towel folded with care, a sealed vial of perfume. The ledger above had burned, names erased, debts forgotten. The towel remained, sounds layered like breath, the chewing of a cow, a child's cough, fleas ticking under skin. A spoon tapped against tin. That too became part of the rhythm. Objects bore the weight, a Turkish rug dulled by ash, a silver hairpin in the floorboards, a quilt, stained but bright where the fold hid the years. Nothing thrown out, nothing truly clean. What was comfort in a place like this? The button, the comb, the mirror? Were they defiance or illusion? Some objects stay because they were never meant to be found. A scarf folded in the shadow of a hearth, a coupe tipped beneath a table, a card case tucked behind broken plaster, initials faded to suggestion. You don't remember the face. You remember the fold, the scent, the way light caught the edge of mother of pearl. Not all traces were elegant. Some were quiet stains in floorboards, a wine ring on oak that resisted sanding, a ribbon pressed flat in a ledger, a line of ink crossed through twice. Someone tried to erase it, but the shadow stayed. Memory is a poor archivist. Objects do better. The West tried to forget. Fires helped. So did time. But here and there, something resisted. The parasol, the feather, the bottle, the glove. Each one waited longer than it should have. Each one spoke without permission. Tell me in the comments what lingered with you, and if you want to keep turning these forgotten pages, subscribe so the next one doesn't close without you. The parasol leaned in the corner, pale green silk, ribs bent, its ivory handle carved with scrolls. No one remembered who left it. The barkeep dusted around it until it belonged to the room, like the chandelier or the hearth. Saloons collected orphans, a silver snuff box, initials worn thin, a pistol with ivory grips tucked behind the bar, a brocade scarf left on a chair, rose powder still clinging to its folds, ghosts of those who stepped in and never came back. Sometimes the ledgers tried to keep up. In San Antonio, silk parasol, pawned, the name torn away. In Dodge, one line struck twice in red. Nearby, a pocket watch cracked in the heat. No ledger claimed him. Luxury turned stranger as silence deepened. A Venetian decanter, empty in stopperless, glinting on a shelf. A damask chair sagging, yet its embroidered roses still caught the light. Ormolu clocks chimed for no one. Sounds sharpened, a cork pulled, a coupe tapped gently on marble, a single piano note struck by accident. Each echo hung too long. In Leadville, a sealed drawer held a folded towel embroidered EL. Beside it, a corked perfume bottle, still sharp. The saloon's ledger ended 3 pages early, torn. The names were gone. The scent remained. Touch confirmed what memory didn't. Silk gone brittle. A pistol grip cold and polished. A snuff box snapped open to dust. A scarf left behind. Perfume intact. The barkeep finally moved the parasol, folded it, set it on the bar. From the silk rose the faint scent of rose water, stronger than memory, more patient than names. Every saloon left fragments. Which would you have remembered? The glove, the parasol, the pocket watch. Tell me what stayed. And if you want to keep opening these pages with me, subscribe before the next one disappears. The sound came first, soft, deliberate. A coupe rolled across marble and tapped another. The note rang high and clear, louder than any voice. The professor caught it mid-spin. Baccarat crystal, vines etched along the bowl, its stem still perfect, its clarity undiminished. By the late 1890s, these rooms remained dressed but hollow. Chandeliers trembled overhead. Alabaster lamps glowed over empty tables. Waistcoats lay untouched across chairs. Linen still creased. Silence filled the space where voices had been. Behind the bar, bottles stood in quiet rows. Green, cobalt, amber. Labels curled in damp air. Some full, some clouded. All waiting. History recorded their numbers. 50,000 bartenders across America. Manuals printed in gilt. Sermons bound tighter still. Pamphlets rode rails westward, declaring the saloon a ruin before it ever emptied. But ledgers say something else. In Denver, a cellar list ends mid-line. 2 columns ruled, never filled. Above, champagne crates rested in straw, foil dull, cork swollen. In Deadwood, the last page of a ledger was torn, blank, unused, and still the air remembered. Smoke clung to drapes, rosewater to brocade. A cork popped, once sweet, now vinegar. A coupe tapped marble like a bell. The piano in the corner gave one brittle note when brushed. No one turned to listen. Artifacts endure what people do not. A damask scrap near a broken sconce. A silver spoon twisted at the stem. A page torn clean from a recipe book. Stir until the surface, and then nothing. The professor adjusted the coupe, steadying its base. The chandelier above caught light and scattered it, a prism of color over dust. The glass did not spill, it only waited. The bar was ritual. The professor's hands moved with care. Knife, shaker, coupe. Waistcoat crisp, cuffs white, every bottle in its place. Behind him, a library of glass, emerald absinthe, cobalt curacao, vermouth wrapped in labels curling from cellar damp. Bitters lived in silver-stopped flasks. Citrus oils gleamed when twisted. A coupe, baccarat, etched with vines, trembled slightly under his hand. The liquid shimmered. The surface stilled. Stir until it reflects. Then stop. Jerry Thomas taught them how in 1862. Harry Johnson refined it in 1882. Bottles ordered by Hugh, menus embossed, fruits arranged like altarpieces. The drink was not poured, it was constructed. Luxury lived in detail. A mother-of-pearl spoon, a porcelain bowl of sliced lemon, embossed menus with gilt corners. Silence while the coupe was lifted, gaslight catching on the rim. patrons watching, not for the flavor, but the moment. A traveler in Denver wrote, he poured green light into a glass. We cheered like he'd sung no name, just the memory of color. Fragments tell the rest. In Cheyenne, a ledger reads, Professor's formula, page torn, no amount. In Leadville, a bartender's journal ends midline, stir until the surface, then stops. In Deadwood, a trunk revealed twisted silver spoons, initials no one traced. The room kept the scent, bitters, lemon peel, rosewater, cigar smoke. The blend changed by the hour, but always returned. The perfume outlasted the professor. By 1900, tens of thousands had followed the ritual. Most were forgotten. Their drinks remained. Their hands stirred silence into glass. The mirror caught the lamplight and fractured it into 100 points. Its frame curled in gilded vines, the leaf worn thin where fingers had traced it in idle moments, but the surface still gleamed. Every prism above was doubled in its depth. The chandelier seemed infinite, each crystal teardrop catching fire until the room glowed brighter than its lamps allowed. For an instant, silence itself was painted in gold. Men leaned against the marble counter, its veins dark green, its surface polished to a sheen that still reflected the stems of glasses set upon it. Cigar ash fell in quiet streams into brass trays, their edges dented from years of use but gleaming where hands had polished them clean. Behind the counter, bottles in green and cobalt glass rose in neat lines. Some bore labels in French script, their edges curled by damp air, their names unreadable now. Above them, shelves carved with scrollwork arched like an altar. A coupe was lifted, its bowl cut with vines, its rim thin as paper. Shadows from its etchings crossed the wood in delicate lines. The noise that night was subdued, cards brushed against felt. Dice rolled and scattered with the sound of bones across stone. Voices stayed low, though a piano tried to rise above them. Its notes clanged, half in tune, its ivory yellowed, its frame warped by years of firelight and damp. Each chord rang brittle, yet still, the instrument played. Descriptions survive in reform reports. A woman from Denver wrote in 1895, the room was hung in damask, the lamps tinted in colored glass, the bar lined with marble. I have seen few churches adorned as richly. She condemned it, but her words linger longer than her verdict. Objects bore their own testimony. In Topeka, when a raid brought down a chandelier, its prisms shattered on snow-covered streets. Rainbows scattered across slush before melting into nothing. In Tombstone, a decanter etched with initials was recovered beneath wreckage, its glass intact, its owner absent from any record. In San Antonio, a ledger ends with the line, room closed, debts struck. The sheet tears downward, as if the decision itself resisted permanence. The air carried contradiction. Bordeaux spilled from a bottle, its sweetness cloying, seeping into wood. Bitters snapped open, releasing clove and bark. Tobacco smoke drifted heavy as cloth, clinging to the folds of coats. Powdered violet rose faintly from a shawl, forgotten on the back of a chair, a ghost of a presence never written down. Sounds layered strangely. The quiet pop of a cork echoed louder than expected. A chair groaned on polished floorboards. Glass chimed as it touched marble, fragile in its clarity. The piano faltered, a string snapping with a sharp twang that silenced the room for a breath before conversation resumed. Even silence here felt rehearsed, as though the room itself held its breath when something broke. Chairs upholstered in silk sagged under weight, but still glowed where lamplight struck the embroidery. A porcelain dish, painted with pastoral scenes, sat empty on a shelf, its glaze catching the orange flame. On the mantel, a clock with ormolu mounts ticked steadily, each chime bright, each one marking time the room pretended to ignore. Mystery crept in through paper. A bartender's notebook found decades later in Leadville contained an unfinished entry. Its ink stopped mid-sentence. A pawn ticket in Cheyenne bore the words, "Professor's formula." Nothing more. The price and name torn away. A ledger from Deadwood listed debts until its last 2 pages, where lines ran blank. Ruled, ready, never filled. The professor working the bar adjusted a coupe on the marble, set it upright, and turned toward the shelves. The chandelier trembled in the draft, its prisms scattering rainbows across wood. He reached for the bottle, tilted it, and the glass. The room breathed in scents before it spoke in sounds. Tobacco smoke curled heavy as wool from brass trays. Violet powder clung to curtains of brocade, faint but stubborn. Bitters uncorked behind the bar, released cloves sharp enough to sting the nose. Bordeaux warmed in glasses gave off sweetness, syrupy and dense, clashing with the sour tang of beer in wooden kegs. Perfume, smoke, sugar, vinegar, each smell at war with the others, none surrendering. Light made it worse. Stained glass lamps tinted the haze red and gold. Their colors fell across alabaster counters veined with gray, where glasses stood in rows, bowls thin as air, stems no thicker than fingers. The bar back was carved in walnut scrolls, dark, gleaming in lamplight. Satin gloves brushed against its edge, fingertips pale with powder. A handkerchief folded in brocade was left on a stool, its corner embroidered with initials unclaimed. History entered through sermons. The Anti-Saloon League, founded in 1893, had by the end of the decade spread to every county in Ohio, Michigan, Kansas. Pamphlets arrived by rail in crates tied with ribbon, their covers embossed with crosses and crests. Kansas had already closed its holes by law, but the ledgers still tell stories. April 1897, debts forgiven. A dozen lines below it, red ink strikes out names. The following page is blank. The professor behind the counter stirred in silence. His spoons were silver, twisted in spirals, their bowls narrow and dented by use. He lifted a coupe etched with diamonds and tilted it into the lamplight, the liquid within pale green, reflecting the glow. His audience had dwindled, but the ritual endured. Objects remembered what people did not. In one cellar, unopened champagne bottles were found decades later, corks swollen, labels of gold foil curling like leaves. In another, porcelain ashtrays painted with pastoral scenes lay cracked but still bright with glaze. A glove of satin, browned with dust, was folded into a ledger book discovered in Leadville, initials stitched in thread, the color of ash. Sounds carried with sharpness when the room was otherwise still. Corks drawn with a hollow pop. Glass stems tapping marble like tiny bells. A piano note struck by accident when someone brushed past, lingering longer than expected. Each sound more haunting for being isolated, as if the room had become an echo chamber of fragments. The contradictions grew sharper in decline. Chairs embroidered with silk thread sagged yet glowed where lamplight touched. A bottle of curacao sat half full on a shelf, its cobalt glass reflecting orange fire. A menu embossed with gilt corners remained pressed between pages of a ledger, its print sharp even when the ink beside it had run. These details last longer than names, and when the air cleared, only the scents held on. Violet, clove, rosewater, smoke, each refusing to fade, each clinging to cloth, long after the cloth was abandoned. Were these rooms remembered for the men who filled them, or for the traces left behind? Was the handkerchief less fragile than its owner? Was the perfume vial stronger than the name of the woman who carried it? Which would you remember, the ledger's silence or the smell still hanging in its folds? The sound cracked like a gunshot, a piano string snapping in the middle of a hymn. For a moment the room froze. The note quivered thin and metallic, then faded into silence that seemed larger than the walls. Dust lifted from the lid, drifting in the lamplight. A man at the counter laughed once, short and brittle, before turning back to his glass. The professor behind the bar did not move at all. The room itself looked unchanged, though time had already begun to erode its purpose. The mahogany rail, polished by decades of palms, still gleamed under the lamps. Their light fell from alabaster shades, the stone veined with pale grey like frozen smoke. Each lamp haloed a section of the bar, leaving corners in shadow. Chairs were still drawn to tables, their cushions sagging, but embroidered in silk thread. Roses bright where fabric had been folded away from wear. On shelves behind the counter, cut glass decanters stood in patient rows. Their stoppers had grown cloudy, the amber inside darkened to molasses. The bottles themselves caught every flicker of flame, scattering it across the marble counter in tiny sparks. Brass trays held cigars, ash grey and curling into powder. Above the shelves, a clock in ormolu mounts ticked steadily, each chime precise, as though time itself ignored the emptiness. The air was thick. Bitters uncorked earlier still lingered. Clove, orange peel, bark. tobacco smoke clung low, soaked into curtains. A sweeter note threaded through, the faint powder of violet perfume left behind in a scarf folded across a chair. And beneath it all, a sourness rising from the floorboards, beer spilled long ago, soaked into the wood, never fully gone. Perfume and rot, elegance and decay, twined into a single breath. Records bear witness to decline. In Ohio and Michigan, councils met in 1898 to strip licenses. Votes read aloud. Ordinances entered in ledgers. The minutes survive. Petition carried. Bar to be closed. But across the street in those same towns, bartenders continued pouring until sheriffs nailed orders to their doors. A Cleveland ledger lists debts through December, then ends mid-line. The pen trails downward, as though its writer had been interrupted mid-stroke. The book was left that way. Archaeologists decades later found fragments. In Dayton, a decanter with initials, ML, its surface cut with diamonds, unbroken though its owner is lost to record. In Columbus, a ledger without binding, pages scattered, corners curled from damp. One sheet bears a note, settled in kind. The rest of the sentence missing. Was it cattle, dust, gold? No answer follows. Which matters more, the object that endures or the name that does not? Which is heavier, a bottle that survives or a man remembered by nothing more than initials? The sounds returned one by one, a cork pulled from its bottle with a hollow pop, echoing too loudly in the empty space. Glass stem tapping marble, ringing like a bell. A chair groaned as someone shifted their weight. The piano struck again, softer this time, as if testing itself. The string's absence was sharp. Each note around it bent oddly, reminding everyone of what had broken. Objects carried on with their own dignity. A menu embossed with gilt corners rested between pages of a ledger, its paper thick, its print sharp, though the ink beside it had already run. A marble spittoon sat at the edge of the room, its rim chipped, its bowl permanently stained. A shawl with embroidered gold thread, left on the back of a chair, carried a faint scent of rose powder. The shawl's folds gleamed when turned in the lamplight, as though still in use. Outside, a hymn rose faintly. Voices joined in steady chorus. It drifted through shutters and mingled with the room's scents, clashing with smoke, bitters, powder. The words were clear enough to be recognized, blurred enough to feel like echoes from another world. For a moment, the saloon seemed like a stage, one side lit with chandeliers, the other with voices of reform. Which song was stronger, the hymn or the clink of glass? Which endured longer, the echo of a piano string breaking, or the scent of violet that still clung to curtains no one touched? The professor lifted a coupe from the shelf, stem thin, bowl etched with vines. He poured carefully, the stream steady, unhurried. The surface trembled under the lamps, reflecting one flame in its pale circle. For an instant, the drink seemed alive, as though it contained its own fire. Then a prism above shifted, scattering the reflection into fragments. The flame dissolved into nothing. On the counter, the coupe remained, untouched. Its rim gleamed in lamplight, its shadow stretched long across marble. No hand reached to lift it. The image froze in the glow of alabaster, waiting. A single prism lay on the floor, its edges chipped, its surface still scattering colors when the lamplight struck it. The chandelier above had lost many of its pieces, yet even broken glass caught fire. When the prism shifted slightly in a draft, a rainbow spread across the marble mantle and vanished just as quickly. The room held its composure. Brocade curtains sagged at the windows, their folds embroidered in fading gold thread. A marble mantle arched over the hearth, its stone cool and veined in grey. Silk cushions sagged on chairs, their colors dulled, but seams intact. On the bar, an alabaster lamp base glowed faintly, the flame within dim, its light soft against mother-of-pearl inlay. Men leaned forward in shadows, their faces blurred by smoke, their hands resting on menus embossed with gilt at the corners. The shelves behind the counter were still orderly, bottles arranged by hue, green beside brown, cobalt beside clear, labels in French and German curled but readable. A silver spoon twisted in spiral lay across a glass, its bowl tarnished but still bright when touched. Each item retained its dignity, though the room around it grew thinner in noise. History pressed in from outside. By 1899, the Anti-Saloon League had reached national force. Their pamphlets, tied with ribbon, announced votes and ordinance in cities across the Midwest. In Kansas, reformers listed closed saloons in ledgers of their own, each entry marked with red lines. In Ohio, city clerks recorded raids in minutes of council meetings. Fixtures destroyed, alcohol poured into street, glass broken. Even here, where chandeliers still scattered rainbows across marble, the pressure mounted. Fragments tell the rest. In Wichita, a ledger discovered decades later ends with the note, "Receipts incomplete." The following page is gone. In Denver, a trunk unearthed from a cellar contained coupes etched with vines and initials never traced. In Deadwood, a fragment of mirror frame was found gilded but empty, the glass lost, the reflection erased. Voices remained low, the scrape of chairs across pine, the cough of a smoker in a corner, the brittle ring of glass set too firmly on marble. A piano key pressed accidentally gave a metallic hum, one string missing, leaving the chord hollow, each sound sharper for being isolated. The professor poured in silence, his hand steady, his coupe held carefully by the stem. A slice of lemon fell, its oil spraying into the air, sharp, fresh, cutting briefly through the weight of tobacco. The scent dissolved as quickly as it came, swallowed by the room's heaviness. Objects were left as if abandoned mid-breath. A glove of satin lay across a chair back, browned by dust. A ledger's leather spine split, pages curling outward as though refusing to be bound. A decanter half full of Bordeaux stood uncorked on the shelf. its surface sticky, its perfume heavy with sweetness turned sour, and the prism on the floor caught the lamplight again, scattering faint bands of color across the wall. For a heartbeat, the room felt alive, painted in rainbows. Then the draft shifted and the light was gone. What lingered was not the image, it was the scent. Bordeaux sweet, rose powder faint, tobacco dense, clove sharp. A fragrance layered so thick it seemed to cling to the walls themselves, waiting long after the doors had closed. The hall was lit by alabaster globes, their light milky and veined, falling across benches polished smooth by decades of hands. Damask drapes sagged along the walls, heavy and dust-scented, their folds swallowing echoes. The floorboards groaned under the weight of boots and hymnals. Outside, the wind scraped against shutters. Inside, voices gathered low, expectant. At the center of the room lay a book. Its leather was cracked, its spine frayed, but its pages remained, browned by heat and lined in careful hand. The first line still listed debts. The last lines were struck through in red. Columns ended halfway. Between two leaves, pressed flat as if hidden long ago, lay a feather dyed crimson. Its edges curled faintly, but its color clung. No name accompanied it. No hand claimed it. The odor of wax thickened the air. Candles guttered in brass candelabra, their flames trembling each time the door opened. Satin hymnals gleamed in lamplight as they shifted in gloved hands. White ribbons gleamed against dark coats. The murmur of prayer hung in corners like smoke, even before the singing began. It was then that the voice rose, sharp against the hush. These halls are the schools of ruin, where every glass poured is a stone laid upon the grave of a man's soul. The words came from Reverend Howard Hyde Russell of the Anti-Saloon League in the year 1900, carried now by another preacher's throat. They landed heavy on wood and plaster, echoing as though carved into the hall itself. The ledger was lifted, held high before the pulpit. Pages turned, names read aloud, each one followed by silence, then by condemnation. The red slashes across columns seemed to bear more weight than the names themselves. Some in the room crossed themselves. Others lifted hymnals higher. The book closed with a crack that startled even the preacher. Records confirmed the movement had gathered strength by then. Kansas, legally dry since 1881, reported dozens of raids still in the 1890s. Ohio councils published minutes of seizures. Fixtures removed, bottles emptied, counters dismantled. In Michigan, reformers listed closed saloons in ledgers of their own, each entry marked with a red X, as if mirroring the books they despised. The Anti-Saloon League expanded in 1900 into every major county, distributing pamphlets embossed with crests and bound in twine. Trains carried them alongside sermons, spreading paper like scripture. Yet objects betrayed sermons. In Columbus, a porcelain decanter with initials faintly etched was discovered intact, though its owner's name had vanished from record. In Denver, a counter inlaid with mother of pearl was dismantled and sold, fragments reappearing in storerooms years later. In Topeka, stained glass lamps taken from saloons reappeared in private parlors, scattering the same rainbows across dining rooms that they once threw across card tables. The things themselves slipped free of condemnation. The air carried contradictions too. Clove and citrus from bitters poured into the street, mingled with the iron scent of spilt blood after scuffles. Bordeaux poured out onto stone, left sweetness that turned sour in the sun. Rose powder clung stubbornly to drapes salvaged from raids, its perfume leaking faintly into the room, even years later. What mattered more, the voice or the objects? Was it the feather folded in the ledger that drew the eye, or the sermon that named the ledger as proof of ruin? Was memory shaped by condemnation, or by the sense that clung to cloth? The shards of glass that still caught lamplight. Every saloon left fragments, but only some were carried forward. The rest lay scattered in ash and silence, unclaimed, unnamed, waiting for someone to decide which mattered. And so I ask, which would you have remembered? The ledger read from the pulpit, the feather folded in its pages, or the decanter left in a cellar, initials etched into glass, initials that no sermon repeated? Tell me in the comments what detail lingers with you, and if you'd like to keep opening these forgotten pages with me, subscribe so the ledger never closes in your hands. It lay across the counter as though placed there deliberately, a single glove, satin pale as ivory, its fingers curled slightly, as if it still remembered the hand it once held. Dust clung to its seams. Along the cuff shimmered embroidery in thread the color of smoke. Initials, faint, precise, almost erased. No page in any surviving ledger bore the same marks. The glove was orphaned, left in a room where objects endured longer than their owners. The counter beneath it was walnut carved in scrolls, its edges worn smooth by years of elbows leaning heavy, coins pushed forward, glasses set down. The wood glowed dark under the lamps. Alabaster globes overhead shed a milky light, veined in grey, their glow softened by dust that settled across them. Their halos caught on bottles arranged neatly still, glass tinted green, cobalt, amber, labels curling like parchment at the edges. Each bottle was a survivor, its paper yellowed, its liquid thickened. A coupe stood nearby, its bowl etched with vines, its stem thin as bone. Shadows from its carvings fell long across marble. The room was silent except for the occasional shift of wood. Chairs embroidered in silk thread sagged but held their shapes. Brocade drapes at the windows sagged heavy, their gold thread patterns dulled. A clock with ormolu mounts ticked faintly from the mantel, its brass face catching the lamp's glow. Below it sat a porcelain dish painted with pastoral fields, its glaze cracked in one corner, but still bright, absurd against the smell of tobacco and sour beer. History tells us what the silence concealed. In Ohio by 1905, more than half the towns had voted dry. The records are plain, licenses rescinded, counters dismantled, glass fixtures seized. In Georgia, 1907 brought statewide prohibition, a law enforced with axes and hymnals. Kansas, though dry since 1881, continued raiding into the new century. Temperance ledgers listed each victory in red. 1 decanter destroyed. 30 bottles emptied, patrons dismissed. They recorded destruction as though it were creation, yet the glove on the counter carried no such entry. No reformer wrote whose initials shimmered on its cuff, or which woman's hand last wore it. Powder lingered faintly on its palm, a ghost of rosewater clinging decades after the wearer vanished. Did she leave it in haste, pulled from the room before collecting it? Or was it placed deliberately, folded once, forgotten by those who came after? Fragments tell the story in pieces. In Deadwood, a ledger torn from its spine left only half the columns intact, debts listed but no names written beside them. In Wichita, archaeologists uncovered a porcelain dish cracked down the center, its glaze catching the sun even in ruin. In Tombstone, an ormolu mirror frame was unearthed without glass, its reflection lost, but its border gleaming. In Denver, a trunk revealed shawls folded in damask, initials stitched carefully into their corners, no owners traced. Each object demanded memory, each name was absent. The air inside was thick. Tobacco smoke soaked deep into drapes, mixed with the sourness of beer that had bled through floorboards years before. Bordeaux once poured lingered in cellars as vinegar, its sweetness long gone. Bitters left behind in uncorked bottles filled the room with clove, bark, citrus sharp enough to sting. Over it all drifted the faintest whisper of violet powder from fabric folded and forgotten, sweet, fragile, unyielding. The professor, who still kept his post though the room was nearly empty, reached for the coupe. His sleeve brushed the glove, disturbing its dust. The initials in thread caught the light one last time, bright for a moment, then dull again. He steadied the coupe on marble, its rim clear, its stem trembling faintly in his grasp. He tilted the bottle. The smell lingered long after the rooms emptied. Ash settled in corners, sharp as iron, rising when disturbed. The sweetness of Bordeaux, once poured in coupes of cut crystal, had thickened into vinegar, its odor cloying, sour, stubborn. Powdered perfume still clung to damask drapes. When the wind moved them, rosewater breathed faintly into the dark, as though the cloth remembered more faithfully than the people. Bitters hardened into resin along the marble counter, their bark and clove sharpness cutting the air even decades after they had been spilled. The counter was cold beneath lamps of alabaster, their globes veined in grey, their halos dimmed. Chairs upholstered in brocade sagged, their silk threads frayed but still patterned in roses, visible when turned toward lamplight. A gilt-edged menu lay pressed between ledger pages, its paper thick as a calling card. its corners embossed with scrolls. The ink on the menu was sharp still, though the names in the ledger beside it had run and blurred. A shawl folded across the arm of a chair bore initials stitched in gold thread, nearly vanished now. By the 1910s, the tide was irreversible. The anti-saloon league, already dominant, filled halls with sermons louder than any piano once had. Pamphlets embossed with crests spread by rail into every county. Kansas had long been dry. Georgia followed in 1907, Mississippi, North Carolina, Virginia, Michigan. By 1915, 33 states carried prohibition laws of their own. The 18th Amendment, passed in 1919, was no shock. It was only the final nail pressed into a coffin already closed. And yet, within these shuttered halls, fragments persisted. In Michigan, a ledger closed with 3 pages ruled but blank, as though the writer had known his hand would never return. In Ohio, a trunk unearthed from a cellar contained a row of coupes etched with vines. They glittered still when raised to the sun, though no initials tied them to a family. In Denver, stained glass lamps once hung above card tables were discovered decades later, lighting parlors, scattering rainbows across domestic walls. In Topeka, porcelain dishes painted with pastoral scenes lay stacked in cellars, their glaze unbroken. Objects that were once condemned slipped quietly back into ordinary life. The air inside told another story. Tobacco, heavy as cloth, would not leave the wood. The sourness of beer, long dried, clung to the floorboards. The perfume of violet and rose remained in fabric, refusing to fade. Each scent spoke more than the ledgers. Each fragrance remembered what paper forgot. The professor, who had survived long enough to see patrons vanish one by one, polished a final coupe. He turned it once in the lamplight, watching the flames scatter across the glass. He set it down gently on marble beside the shawl folded in dust. His hand lingered, then withdrew. The glove, the feather, the watch, the perfume, they remained. Their owners had not. So what endures? The sermon shouted into halls, or the perfume that still clings to drapes? The ink of red slashes across names, or the initials embroidered faintly into cloth? Which carries memory longer, the ledger or the ash? Tell me in the comments what fragment stayed with you, the glove, the prism, the ledger, or the perfume that refused to fade. Here is the short teaser for the next video coming up. Deadly plants, native tribes avoided, but you don't. They grew in silence, tall as men, roots twisted deep into soil older than maps. Tribes knew their danger and marked them carefully. Leaves never to be touched, berries never to be swallowed, flowers never to be inhaled. Yet centuries later, the same plants lie in gardens, in kitchens, even in medicines on shelves. Knowledge was lost, warnings were erased, and what was once avoided has become common, waiting for someone to notice too late. And if you'd like to keep turning the ledger with me, subscribe so the next story opens in your hands.